Have you ever wondered if you truly make the choices in your life? Or if they're shaped by forces beyond your control? What if the idea of free will, as we know it, is just an illusion? A construct designed by society and religion to keep us in check? Think about it. If every action you take, every choice you make, is predetermined by unconscious desires, instincts, and the expectations of the world around you, can you really call yourself free? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most provocative thinkers in philosophy, Friedrich Nietzsche. In this video, we will explore Nietzsche's radical rejection of traditional free will and examine his views on moral responsibility, human flourishing, and the way we create meaning in our lives. What does Nietzsche believe about our ability to choose freely? And more importantly, what would it mean if we embraced his philosophy of self-creation? Free from societal constraints? This isn't just a theoretical debate. It's a conversation that affects how we live, how we make decisions, and how we see our true potential. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Nietzsche argued that true freedom comes not from choosing freely, but from overcoming societal norms and creating your own values. But before we dive in, I want to ask you for a favor. If you find this video thought-provoking, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more content like this. Your support helps me bring you more of these deep dives into philosophy. Also, if you really enjoyed the video, please consider donating a super thanks. It's a great way to show your appreciation and support the channel directly. Now, let's jump into Nietzsche's philosophy and discover how the death of free will might just be the key to unlocking your true potential. When we consider the concept of free will, most of us believe that we are the masters of our own destiny, making independent choices based on personal desires, rational thought, and individual values. However, Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most provocative and influential philosophers, challenges this very belief. Nietzsche's critique of free will goes beyond a mere rejection of the idea. He argues that free will, as we typically understand it, is an illusion. The choices we make are often far from free, but are instead heavily influenced by unconscious forces, social conditioning, and biological instincts. Nietzsche's view that the idea of free will is an illusion forces us to reconsider not only how we think about autonomy and human agency, but also how we live our lives within the confines of society, culture, and even science. Nietzsche begins his critique by questioning the very premise of free will, the belief that we are entirely autonomous beings capable of making independent decisions. In his view, traditional philosophy has been overly optimistic about the nature of human freedom. For centuries, Western thought, shaped by thinkers like Descartes and Kant, placed humans at the center of a rational universe where reason and free will go hand in hand. This traditional perspective holds that humans are rational agents, capable of making conscious decisions that reflect their innermost desires and intentions. According to Nietzsche, this understanding of free will is deeply flawed, and it distorts the true nature of human behavior. For Nietzsche, free will cannot be disentangled from the deeper forces that shape human lives, forces like unconscious drives, instincts, biology, and societal conditioning. We often think of ourselves as free individuals, making rational choices based on our own desires. Yet Nietzsche argues that many of these choices are predetermined by these underlying factors. He asserts that much of our behavior is shaped by forces outside our conscious awareness. These forces, which often remain invisible to us, include social pressures, family expectations, cultural norms, and even our biology, factors that exert far more influence on us than we realize. In this sense, the freedom we experience in making choices is an illusion, and our so-called free will is constrained by the limitations and influences of our environment, past experiences, and innate impulses. Let's take a real-life example to make this clearer. Imagine a person caught between two career paths, each seemingly offering different possibilities for the future. On the surface, it looks like a decision driven by personal preference. This person is choosing one path over another. But upon closer examination, we might see that their decision is far from free. External pressures, such as family expectations, societal standards, or economic necessity, are likely influencing this decision far more than their internal desires. Perhaps their family has always expected them to pursue a career in medicine, Or perhaps they feel a societal pressure to choose a stable, well-paying job over a passion project that might offer more freedom but less security. Nietzsche would argue that, in this scenario, free will is an illusion. The person may believe they are making a free choice, but the reality is that their decision is shaped by factors outside their control, ones they may not even be fully aware of. This is one of Nietzsche's key points. What we think of as free will is often nothing more than a complex web of external influences, unconscious desires, and biological drives that push us in certain directions. Nietzsche's critique doesn't just challenge our perception of freedom on a philosophical level. It also has profound implications for how we live our lives and understand personal responsibility. If free will is an illusion, then how do we understand moral responsibility? How do we reconcile our sense of self-determination with the fact that many of our choices are shaped by forces beyond our control? Nietzsche believed that traditional morality, particularly the Judeo-Christian notion of sin and guilt, is built on the misguided assumption that individuals have absolute control over their actions. This moral framework assumes that we are fully responsible for the choices we make, and that we are morally accountable for every action. However, Nietzsche argued that this view fails to account for the complex, often hidden, forces that influence our decisions. According to him, moral responsibility is not as simple as choosing between right and wrong. It's much more complicated. And we must take into account the deeper, more subtle forces that shape our choices. Consider, for example, the notion of guilt in the context of free will. Many people feel guilty about their actions, particularly when they make decisions that go against social or moral expectations. But what if these feelings of guilt are not simply the result of free choices but are instead the product of societal conditioning and biological instincts? Nietzsche would argue that we often internalize social and moral expectations to such a degree that we begin to feel responsible for things that may not truly be within our control. For instance, a person might feel guilty for choosing a career path that diverges from their family's expectations, even though their decision was driven by a deep internal need for self-expression and freedom. Nietzsche would suggest that this guilt is not a result of free will but rather a byproduct of the conflicting forces of social conditioning and personal desire. Nietzsche's radical perspective on free will also intersects with his ideas on science and human nature. In his time, the rise of scientific thought, particularly the theory of evolution and the study of human biology, was already challenging long-held beliefs about human agency. Nietzsche saw science not as an enemy but as a force that would help reveal the deeper truths about human nature, including the illusion of free will. He was keenly aware that the scientific understanding of human beings as biological creatures, shaped by evolutionary history and genetic inheritance, could challenge the concept of free will. According to Nietzsche, much of what we think of as choice is deeply influenced by our biological makeup. Our instincts, desires, and even our ability to reason are shaped by the body and the brain, which in turn are shaped by evolutionary processes. This means that our so-called free choices are often the result of unconscious drives and impulses, not rational, independent decisions. In this way, Nietzsche's critique of free will aligns with modern scientific views on human behavior, which emphasize the role of biology and unconscious processes in shaping our actions. One of the key points Nietzsche makes in his critique of free will is that it leads to a false sense of moral responsibility. Traditional moral systems, which emphasize personal responsibility and individual accountability, fail to account for the many forces that shape human behavior. Nietzsche argued that the conventional view of free will places an unrealistic burden on individuals to control their desires, instincts, and actions. Instead, he believed that true freedom comes from acknowledging the forces that shape us and overcoming them, not by pretending they don't exist or trying to suppress them. The idea of self-overcoming, which is central to Nietzsche's philosophy, involves recognizing these forces and using them to create a new, more empowered self. This is the essence of Nietzsche's philosophy of the will to power, the idea that humans must assert their own strength and create their own values, even in the face of the many influences that seek to shape them. Nietzsche's rejection of free will is not a nihilistic denial of human agency, rather, it is a call for a more honest, nuanced understanding of what it means to be free. By acknowledging the complexities and contradictions of human behavior, Nietzsche invites us to take responsibility for our lives in a deeper, more meaningful way, instead of clinging to the illusion of free will and moral responsibility. Nietzsche challenges us to embrace the realities of human existence, our biological drives, our cultural conditioning, and our unconscious desires, and to use these forces to create lives that are truly our own. In doing so, we can transcend the limitations that society and biology impose on us and become more fully realized human beings, living authentically and powerfully. In the end, Nietzsche's critique of free will forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our nature. It asks us to question the assumptions we've made about ourselves and our ability to choose. But it also offers a liberating vision, one where we can finally stop pretending that we are free in the traditional sense and instead embrace the forces that shape us, using them to create a life that is genuinely our own. Nietzsche's philosophy calls for a deeper, more honest understanding of freedom, one that does not rely on the illusion of choice but instead empowers us to assert our will and live authentically. Friedrich Nietzsche's rejection of traditional theories of free will is one of the cornerstones of his philosophical critique of Western morality and human agency. While most classical thinkers, from Aristotle to Kant, assumed that human beings possess the ability to make rational, autonomous decisions, Nietzsche challenges this idea by arguing that what we consider to be free will is nothing more than an illusion. For Nietzsche, human behavior is driven not by rational thought or conscious decision-making, but by unconscious instincts, desires, and external influences. This perspective directly undermines the traditional theory of free will, which presupposes that humans are free, rational agents capable of choosing their actions independent of any external forces. To understand Nietzsche's critique, it's important to first examine the traditional conception of free will. In classical philosophy, free will is often defined as the ability to make choices that are not determined by prior causes or external factors. This concept of free will suggests that individuals have control over their actions and are responsible for their choices, making them morally accountable for their deeds. Rational decision-making, based on logical reasoning and personal reflection, is thought to be the key to exercising free will. If you can weigh the pros and cons of a situation and choose the course of action that aligns with your values, you are considered to be exercising free will. However, Nietzsche believed that this view of human freedom is fundamentally flawed. In his view, the so-called free will that humans experience is a mere illusion, a byproduct of social conditioning, biological instincts, and unconscious drives that influence our decisions without us even realizing it. Nietzsche's philosophy is rooted in the idea that human beings are not rational, autonomous agents but rather complex creatures whose actions are often determined by forces beyond their conscious awareness. According to Nietzsche, many of the decisions we make are not the result of deliberate, rational thought, but rather the manifestation of unconscious desires, ingrained habits, and societal influences that shape our behavior. A powerful example of Nietzsche's argument can be found in the struggle of someone trying to quit smoking. Imagine a person who has decided, many times over, to stop smoking. They consciously understand the health risks and the benefits of quitting, and they may even want to stop for their well-being or the good of their family. However, despite their best efforts, they repeatedly fail. Each time they make the decision to quit, they find themselves reaching for a cigarette again. On the surface, it seems like a failure of willpower, a failure to exercise free will. But Nietzsche would argue that this failure is not just about a lack of discipline or rational choice. Instead, it is an indication that their behavior is driven by forces beyond their conscious control, such as addiction, habit, and the ingrained neurological patterns that influence their cravings. In this scenario, the person may believe they have the free will to quit smoking, but their unconscious desires, shaped by addiction, are the true forces at play. This struggle highlights the core of Nietzsche's critique, that what we often perceive as free will is in reality the result of complex, hidden forces. The addiction to nicotine, the social environments that encourage smoking, and even the brain's reward system all exert influence over the individual's decisions. These factors shape their behavior in ways that are outside their conscious awareness and control, thereby calling into question the traditional conception of free will. Nietzsche's rejection of free will is not limited to examples of addiction or unconscious desires. His critique extends to the very nature of human motivation. For Nietzsche, human beings are not born as blank slates or as rational agents making independent choices. Instead, he viewed humans as creatures driven by primal instincts, desires, and impulses, forces that operate beneath the surface of conscious thought. These instincts are not merely biological urges, but deeply ingrained aspects of human nature that guide our actions, beliefs, and values. To further understand Nietzsche's rejection of free will, we need to consider his concept of the will to power. A central idea in his philosophy, Nietzsche argued that the primary force driving human behavior is not the rational mind or the capacity for logical decision-making, but the will to power, the innate drive to assert one's strength, overcome obstacles, and achieve dominance. This drive is not about power in the conventional sense, such as political or social control, but rather the desire for self-mastery, personal growth, and creative expression. In Nietzsche's view, this will to power is the fundamental force that motivates human action, and it is shaped by both unconscious desires and external influences. The will to power is not a matter of conscious choice. It is not something that we can decide to exercise or not. Instead, it is an inherent aspect of our being, influencing our thoughts and actions in ways that we may not even fully understand. In this way, the traditional notion of free will, which assumes that we can make independent choices based on reason and logic, is rendered meaningless. Nietzsche's philosophy suggests that much of what we do is driven by unconscious forces, deeply rooted instincts, and the will to power that compels us to seek self-assertion and self-overcoming. This critique of free will also has significant implications for moral responsibility. If our actions are not truly the result of independent, rational decisions, but are instead shaped by hidden forces beyond our control, then how can we hold people morally accountable for their actions? Nietzsche's challenge to the concept of free will forces us to reconsider the foundations of moral responsibility. If free will is an illusion, then the moral frameworks built upon it, frameworks that assign blame and praise based on individual choice, must also be re-examined. In modern society, we often hear people talk about personal responsibility and the importance of making good choices. This emphasis on individual responsibility can be seen in countless social, political, and economic systems, where individuals are held accountable for their actions. However, Nietzsche's critique suggests that this emphasis on personal responsibility may be misguided. If our behavior is determined by unconscious desires, biological instincts, and social conditioning, then the idea of holding someone entirely accountable for their choices may be an oversimplification. In Nietzsche's view, true freedom and moral responsibility come not from exercising free will but from acknowledging the deeper forces that shape us and learning to assert our will to power in a way that transcends these limitations. This brings us to the modern-day battle between self-discipline and unconscious desires. Many of us believe that we are free to make decisions based on our conscious desires and values. But the reality is often far more complex. The struggle between self-discipline and unconscious desires plays out in everyday life. From the temptation to indulge in unhealthy habits to the difficulty of pursuing long-term goals over immediate gratification. Whether we are fighting to break an addiction, overcome procrastination, or make difficult life choices, we often find ourselves caught between our conscious desires and the unconscious forces that shape our behavior. Nietzsche's philosophy highlights that the free will we think we possess is often shaped by these hidden forces, making true autonomy more elusive than we realize. In this sense, Nietzsche's rejection of free will is not a call for fatalism or passivity. Rather, it is a call to confront the hidden forces that shape our behavior and to transcend them. Nietzsche encourages us to embrace our instincts, desires, and drives, but to do so in a way that allows us to assert our own strength and create new values. By recognizing that free will is an illusion, we are freed from the burden of trying to control everything and can instead focus on the deeper work of self-overcoming and personal growth. In conclusion, Nietzsche's rejection of traditional theories of free will forces us to rethink our understanding of human agency, moral responsibility, and personal growth. By acknowledging the powerful unconscious forces that influence our decisions, we can gain a more accurate and nuanced understanding of human behavior. Nietzsche's philosophy challenges us to go beyond the illusion of free will and to engage in the difficult but empowering process of self-overcoming, where we assert our own will to power and live authentically in spite of the forces that seek to shape us. Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the will to power, represents a significant departure from traditional notions of human motivation, especially those rooted in the idea of free will. In conventional philosophy, free will is often seen as the ability to make choices independent of external influences or internal compulsions. Humans, according to this view, are seen as rational beings capable of making decisions based on conscious reasoning and personal values. Nietzsche, however, argues that the traditional understanding of free will is not only inadequate but misleading. Instead of viewing human behavior as a product of free will, Nietzsche contends that humans are primarily driven by an inherent will to power, a force that pushes us to assert our strength, master ourselves, and overcome obstacles, rather than merely making independent decisions. The will to power is, at its core, Nietzsche's theory of human motivation. It is not about power in the conventional sense of domination over others, as we might think in terms of political power or control over resources. Rather, the will to power refers to the fundamental drive for self-mastery, growth, and the overcoming of challenges. Nietzsche sees life as a constant struggle, one in which individuals are continuously pushing against obstacles, societal expectations, and internal limitations. This drive for self-assertion is not just about conquering the external world, it's about mastering oneself, one's emotions, desires, and instincts. It is the force that compels a person to evolve, to break free from the constraints of the past, and to create new values and meanings. To illustrate this, imagine a person who rises from a difficult childhood, one marked by poverty, neglect, or hardship. This person faces significant challenges. But instead of succumbing to the weight of their circumstances, they rise above them. They work tirelessly, overcoming personal and social obstacles, and ultimately build a successful life. In traditional thinking, this story might be framed as one of individual free choice, a person choosing to rise above their circumstances through sheer willpower and rational decision-making. However, Nietzsche would view this story differently. For Nietzsche, the individual's success isn't merely a matter of choosing freely between options, but is instead the result of an underlying force driving them to assert their will to power. It is the internal drive to transcend the limitations imposed by their environment, family, or circumstances that propels them forward. Nietzsche would argue that what we perceive as a free choice is, in fact, the manifestation of this deeper, unconscious drive. This concept can be further explored through the example of a self-made entrepreneur. Imagine an individual who starts a business from scratch, against the odds, in a competitive industry. On the surface, their success may seem to be the result of independent decisions, choosing to pursue a career in business, working hard to build the company, and making strategic choices along the way. However, Nietzsche would argue that these decisions are not as free as they might appear. The entrepreneur's drive to start a business and achieve success is not simply the result of conscious, rational decision-making, but rather an expression of their will to power, the desire to create something of their own, to assert control over their destiny, and to push against societal expectations or familial pressures stems from an internal force that Nietzsche describes as the will to power. This drive manifests itself in various ways. The entrepreneur may feel an innate urge to prove themselves, not only to others but also to themselves. They might face self-doubt, insecurity, and the pressure to conform to societal standards of success. But the will to power drives them to transcend these limitations. It is this inner strength that motivates them to persevere, to innovate, and to create a business that reflects their unique vision. Nietzsche would suggest that this drive is not the result of free will in the traditional sense, but rather the expression of a deeper, more primal force that compels them to master their environment and assert their own strength. Moreover, Nietzsche's will to power is not a static force. It is dynamic and ever-changing, constantly evolving as individuals confront new challenges and overcome obstacles. In Nietzsche's view, life itself is a continuous process of becoming, of constantly striving to transcend one's current limitations and grow beyond one's present state. This process of self-overcoming is at the heart of the will to power. It is not simply about achieving external goals or accumulating material wealth, but about the continuous evolution of the self. It is through this process of self-mastery and personal growth that individuals create meaning and purpose in their lives. For Nietzsche, the will to power also has profound implications for morality. Traditional moral systems, especially those grounded in religious or societal doctrines, are often seen as constraining the individual's ability to assert their will to power. Nietzsche critiques these systems because they promote values such as humility, self-sacrifice, and submission, all of which, in his view, undermine the individual's potential for self-overcoming and self-assertion. According to Nietzsche, morality based on these values represses the innate drive for growth and personal power, leading individuals to deny their true desires and instincts. Nietzsche's philosophy, in contrast, advocates for a morality of self-assertion, where individuals create their own values based on their unique desires and experiences. This is a moral framework that encourages individuals to embrace their will to power, to live authentically, and to shape their own lives according to their personal vision. In this view, individuals are not bound by external moral laws or societal expectations, but instead are free to define their own path and create their own meaning in life. In this light, the will to power is not just a personal drive but a transformative force that can reshape the world. Nietzsche believes that individuals who assert their will to power are not only transforming themselves but also challenging the status quo and reshaping the world around them. The self-made entrepreneur, for example, is not just creating a business, they are also challenging the established norms of their industry and society. They are asserting their vision of what is possible and pushing against the boundaries that have been set by others. In this way, the will to power extends beyond the individual and has the potential to impact the larger world. Furthermore, Nietzsche's view of the will to power challenges the traditional dichotomy between good and evil. In conventional moral systems, individuals are often defined by their actions as either good or bad, depending on whether they align with social or religious norms. Nietzsche, however, rejects this simplistic view of morality and instead argues that individuals should not be defined by external judgments but by their ability to assert their own strength and will. The will to power is not about conforming to moral standards but about transcending them and creating one's own values in the face of life's challenges. To better understand Nietzsche's concept of the will to power, it is helpful to reflect on the ways in which we experience this drive in our own lives. Think about a time when you faced a difficult challenge or an obstacle that seemed insurmountable. Perhaps it was a personal crisis, a professional setback, or an internal struggle with self-doubt. In these moments, you might have felt an inner urge to push forward, to overcome the difficulty, and to rise above the circumstances. This drive to keep going, to assert your strength and will, is what Nietzsche describes as the will to power. It is the inner force that compels you to transcend your limitations and to continue striving, no matter how difficult the journey. In conclusion, Nietzsche's concept of the will to power offers a profound rethinking of human motivation and personal agency. Rather than seeing humans as free agents making rational decisions based on conscious thought, Nietzsche suggests that we are driven by an inherent desire to assert our strength, overcome obstacles, and master ourselves. This drive, which Nietzsche terms the will to power, is not about control over others but about the continuous process of self-overcoming and self-mastery. It is through this drive that we create meaning in our lives, challenge societal norms, and reshape the world around us. The will to power is not just a force for personal growth but a transformative force that has the potential to revolutionize how we live, think, and interact with the world. The relationship between science and free will has been a contentious issue in philosophical discourse for centuries. With the rise of modern scientific fields such as psychology, biology, and neuroscience, our understanding of human behavior has undergone a profound transformation. Nietzsche, writing in the late 19th century, anticipated the impact that scientific discoveries would have on the traditional view of free will, a view that has long been central to Western philosophy. His critique of free will, especially in relation to science, suggests that human beings are far less autonomous than we might think. Instead of being free agents making independent choices, our actions are deeply influenced by genetic predispositions, evolutionary history, and the environment in which we are raised. For Nietzsche, the rise of scientific thought about human behavior essentially spells the death of free will, showing it to be a mere illusion. The concept of free will traditionally seen as the ability of individuals to make independent and rational choices, has been the cornerstone of many moral and ethical systems. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant and John Locke held that humans were capable of acting freely, guided by reason, and responsible for their actions. This notion of free will has been essential to ideas of personal responsibility, moral judgment, and the justice system. However, Nietzsche, along with many modern thinkers, questions whether this idealized version of free will is an accurate reflection of human nature. As our understanding of the brain, genetics, and psychology has advanced, it has become increasingly clear that our behavior is shaped by forces outside of our conscious control. One of the central aspects of Nietzsche's critique of free will is his opposition to the deterministic view of human behavior. Determinism, which is the belief that all events, including human actions, are the result of preceding causes, stands in direct contrast to the idea of free will. For Nietzsche, the notion that we freely choose our actions is not just a misunderstanding of human nature, it's a delusion that blinds us to the real factors that govern our behavior. Nietzsche's deterministic view, however, doesn't suggest that we are mere puppets being pulled by invisible strings. Rather, he suggests that our actions are shaped by an intricate web of forces, biological, social, psychological, and environmental, that influence us in ways we are not fully aware of. Modern scientific discoveries in psychology and biology provide a striking example of how human behavior is influenced by factors beyond our conscious control. Research in genetics has shown that many aspects of our personality, including tendencies toward aggression, impulsivity, and even predispositions to mental health conditions like depression, have a strong genetic component. These findings challenge the notion of the autonomous individual making free choices based solely on rational thought. If our behavior is largely influenced by our genes, then the idea of free will, as traditionally conceived, becomes increasingly difficult to defend. For example, studies have shown that people who have a family history of mental illness are more likely to develop similar conditions, suggesting that much of their behavior may be the result of genetic predisposition rather than conscious choice. The role of brain chemistry in shaping our decisions further complicates the traditional view of free will. Neurotransmitters such as dopamine and serotonin play a significant role in regulating mood, motivation, and behavior. When these chemicals are imbalanced, as is the case in disorders like anxiety, depression, or bipolar disorder, they can severely impact a person's ability to make what we consider to be free choices. For instance, a person with anxiety may find it nearly impossible to act confidently in social situations. Despite wanting to engage with others, their inability to act freely may not be due to a lack of willpower or rational thinking, but rather the result of deep-seated mental conditioning and biological factors that constrain their behavior. From a Nietzschean perspective, this challenges the idea that people can be fully accountable for their actions if their behavior is so strongly influenced by forces beyond their control. Moreover, modern psychology has shown that early childhood experiences such as trauma, abuse, or neglect can deeply shape a person's choices throughout their life. People who grow up in environments that encourage certain behaviors or who experience trauma may develop patterns of thinking and behavior that limit their ability to act freely in later life. The case of someone who grew up in an abusive home, for example, might find themselves repeating patterns of unhealthy relationships in adulthood, despite their conscious desire to avoid them. This repetition of patterns, often referred to as learned behavior, is a result of early life experiences that shaped their emotional and psychological responses. Nietzsche's view aligns with modern psychological theories in that it emphasizes the powerful role that unconscious forces play in shaping our behavior. The idea that we can simply choose to break free from these patterns through sheer will is, according to Nietzsche, an illusion. Nietzsche's argument also extends to the environment in which a person is raised and the historical context in which they live. He emphasizes that individuals are shaped by their surroundings, including the social, cultural, and economic forces that influence their decisions. Take, for example, a person born into poverty, with limited access to education, healthcare, and social mobility. In many cases, this person's ability to choose a different path in life is constrained by systemic factors beyond their control. Nietzsche would argue that their free will is limited by these external forces, which may prevent them from ever being able to rise above their circumstances. This example highlights Nietzsche's belief that freedom is not simply about individual choice, but also about the removal of external barriers that limit a person's potential. The growing body of research on social inequality further underscores Nietzsche's critique of free will. People who are born into disadvantaged situations often face significant challenges in achieving the same opportunities as those born into wealth or privilege. Whether it is due to unequal access to education, systemic racism, or economic inequality, the ability to choose a better life is severely restricted for many. This is not to say that individuals in these situations cannot overcome adversity, but rather that their freedom is constrained by larger social structures that shape their opportunities. Nietzsche would argue that the illusion of free will leads to a simplistic view of these individuals' struggles, failing to account for the deep-rooted societal and biological forces at play. In the face of these scientific revelations, Nietzsche's critique of free will remains highly relevant. His assertion that humans are not fully autonomous beings capable of making independent choices resonates strongly with contemporary views on behavior and psychology. Our actions, far from being the result of free will, are often shaped by a complex interplay of genetic, environmental, and psychological factors. The more we understand about the biology of human behavior, the more Nietzsche's critique of free will appears to be prescient. While we may have the illusion of free will, the truth is that our decisions are often shaped by factors beyond our control, factors that are deeply embedded in our biology, upbringing, and environment. In conclusion, the death of free will, as Nietzsche predicts, is not just a philosophical argument but a perspective that aligns with modern scientific understanding. The rise of psychology, neuroscience, and genetics has shown us that human behavior is far more complex than the simple act of making choices based on rational thought. As we continue to learn more about the ways in which our brains, bodies, and environments shape us, Nietzsche's critique challenges us to reconsider what it means to be free. Are we truly autonomous beings, or are our choices shaped by forces beyond our control? In the end, Nietzsche forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that free will, as traditionally understood, may be nothing more than an illusion. Friedrich Nietzsche's thought experiment on eternal recurrence presents one of the most profound challenges to the traditional notion of free will. The idea that every action, every decision we make, will repeat infinitely over time is not only a striking philosophical concept but also a serious challenge to how we understand autonomy, agency, and the very meaning of our choices. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence forces us to confront the question of whether our decisions are truly free or if they are bound by forces beyond our control. This challenge becomes even more pressing when we consider the implications of living our lives again and again for eternity. If every moment, every action, every choice were to repeat forever, would we still consider our choices free? Would they be meaningful in the context of endless repetition? Or would they simply become inevitable, deterministic events? At the core of Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence is the idea that life, in all its details, repeats itself infinitely. Imagine that every action you take today, whether it's a decision about your career, your relationships, or even something as small as the way you spend your afternoon, would be repeated an infinite number of times, without end. Nietzsche's proposition is not just about the repetition of major life events, but also the smallest and most trivial moments. What would it mean to live your life again and again, exactly the same way, forever? Nietzsche asks us to consider whether this thought experiment could be a source of despair or revelation of profound meaning. The challenge of eternal recurrence lies in the tension it creates between determinism and free will. If we truly have free will, our choices should be autonomous, made in the moment, influenced by our desires, and reflective of our individual values. Free will, in this traditional sense, implies that we have the power to shape our future in ways that are not predetermined by past actions or external forces. But eternal recurrence throws this idea into question. If every action we take is destined to repeat forever, then does it matter how we choose? Are we simply repeating a cycle of actions that is not really under our control? If our decisions are bound to repeat eternally, are they still the result of free will, or are they simply part of a larger, unchangeable pattern? To understand the significance of this thought experiment, let's take a practical example. A person making decisions about their career and relationships. Imagine someone choosing between two potential career paths. one that offers financial stability but little personal fulfillment, and another that is deeply satisfying but financially uncertain. In the context of eternal recurrence, the decision becomes far more significant. Nietzsche's challenge is to ask this person to imagine that, whatever decision they make, it will be repeated for eternity. If they choose the stable, but unfulfilling career, they will live that same life stuck in the same cycle of unfulfillment forever. Similarly, if they choose the fulfilling career, with all its uncertainties and risks, that life, with all its highs and lows, will be lived over and over again, for eternity. Now, let's consider the real-life implications of this thought experiment. How would knowing that every action you take, every choice you make, will repeat infinitely affect the way you live your life? Would it lead you to make different decisions? Or would it make you feel trapped in a cycle of repetition, where your choices no longer feel free? Nietzsche's eternal recurrence asks us to confront the ultimate consequence of our actions, the possibility that we will live with the results of our decisions forever. If you knew that your life would be lived in the same way for eternity, would you still make the same choices? Would the weight of repetition make you more careful in how you choose? Or would it lead you to despair, knowing that there is no escape from the consequences of your decisions? Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence also forces us to think about the nature of responsibility and accountability. If we believe in free will, then we hold individuals accountable for their actions, assuming that they have the power to choose differently. However, in the context of eternal recurrence, the idea of accountability becomes murkier. If every choice is fated to repeat forever, then is anyone truly responsible for their actions? Or is life simply a deterministic cycle of events that we cannot escape from? No matter how much we try, Nietzsche's thought experiment challenges the very foundations of moral responsibility, suggesting that perhaps our perception of free will is based on a false assumption that we are truly free to choose our actions, when in fact we may be bound by forces we cannot control. This brings us to a critical question. How does eternal recurrence relate to the concept of meaning in life? If every action we take repeats forever, does that make life less meaningful, or does it imbue every moment with a deeper sense of significance? Nietzsche suggests that eternal recurrence can actually be a source of great empowerment and meaning. The idea is that, if we were to fully embrace the eternal return of our actions, we would begin to live each moment with profound intentionality. Rather than seeing life as something to be endured or escaped, we could see it as an opportunity to affirm the beauty, the struggles, and the triumphs of each moment. If we truly embraced the eternal recurrence of our choices, we would be forced to confront our deepest values and desires, to live authentically, and to make decisions that reflect who we are and who we want to become. In this sense, eternal recurrence can be seen as a test of how fully we live our lives. If we can look at our decisions and say, "I would choose this again, over and over, for eternity," then we are truly living in alignment with our deepest values. This is not an easy ideal to attain. Nietzsche's challenge is not just to live in a way that feels satisfying in the moment, but to live in such a way that, if our lives were to repeat for eternity, we would embrace the repetition with joy and enthusiasm. The eternal recurrence, when fully embraced, becomes a way to test the authenticity of our choices. It is a way to ensure that our decisions are not made from fear, resentment, or regret, but from a deep love of life itself, with all its complexities and contradictions. This idea also brings us to the concept of personal transformation. If we are caught in a cycle of eternal recurrence, then the way we live our lives today can be an opportunity to reimagine who we are and who we want to be. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence offers a path for self-overcoming, where each moment becomes an opportunity for growth and transformation. If we live our lives with the knowledge that every action will repeat forever, then we are encouraged to transcend our past mistakes and limitations and to continually strive for self-improvement and authenticity. Nietzsche's philosophy, in this sense, calls us to embrace the fullness of life, to live boldly, and to take responsibility for the choices we make, knowing that these choices will echo throughout eternity. To further understand the practical implications of eternal recurrence, let's apply it to everyday decision-making. Imagine that you are faced with a difficult decision, such as whether to reconcile with a friend after a long-standing argument. In the context of eternal recurrence, the weight of this decision becomes far more profound. If you choose to forgive your friend and mend the relationship, this act of reconciliation would repeat forever, each time carrying with it the same meaning and significance. On the other hand, if you choose to hold on to resentment and avoid reconciliation, that same feeling of bitterness and distance would be perpetually sustained. The choice to forgive or to remain angry would not just affect your immediate future, it would shape the eternal cycle of your existence. In reflecting on the eternal recurrence, Nietzsche's philosophy calls us to examine our lives from a broader perspective. It asks us to consider whether we are truly living the life we would choose if we knew it would be repeated infinitely. This exercise forces us to think about the long-term consequences of our decisions, not just in terms of their immediate impact but in terms of their eternal resonance. The eternal recurrence challenges us to think beyond the moment, to consider the deeper meaning of our actions, and to live in a way that is consistent with our values, regardless of the challenges or obstacles we may face. In conclusion, Nietzsche's thought experiment on eternal recurrence poses a significant challenge to the way we think about free will, responsibility, and the meaning of life, by asking us to consider whether we would make the same choices if they were to repeat eternally. Nietzsche forces us to confront the true nature of our decisions and their long-term consequences. While eternal recurrence may initially seem like a burdensome concept, Nietzsche suggests that it can be a source of profound empowerment. By embracing the idea that every choice we make will be repeated forever, we are encouraged to live each moment with purpose, authenticity, and a deep love for life. The eternal return invites us to transcend the limits of our immediate desires and to create a life that is truly worth living, one that we would embrace over and over for eternity. Friedrich Nietzsche's critique of religious conceptions of free will, particularly within Christianity, provides a profound and critical lens through which to view human autonomy. In Christian theology, free will is often framed within a framework of salvation and damnation. Individuals are seen as possessing the ability to choose between good and evil, with the consequences of their choices carrying eternal weight. Nietzsche, however, contends that this religious view of free will burdens individuals not with true autonomy, but with an illusory sense of responsibility, one that is rooted in guilt, sin, and divine judgment. This notion, according to Nietzsche, limits human freedom, perpetuates internal conflict, and suppresses individual will by tying human actions to a higher moral order that is imposed externally rather than arising from personal will. One of the key critiques Nietzsche makes about religious interpretations of free will is that they obscure the deeper, more fundamental influences on human behavior. In traditional Christian thought, free will is the mechanism by which humans choose salvation or damnation. It is the freedom to align with God's will or to turn away and embrace sin. However, Nietzsche argues that this framework fails to acknowledge the complex array of influences, societal norms, family expectations, cultural conditioning, and biological instincts that shape human choices. In fact, he believes that these religious doctrines, rather than offering individuals genuine freedom, force them into a moral framework that stifles true self-expression and autonomy. For Nietzsche, the idea of free will as it is presented in Christian morality is not a liberating force but a mechanism of control. The Christian moral framework encourages individuals to see their every action as either a step toward eternal salvation or a fall into damnation. The burden of this choice becomes immense, as it places every action, no matter how small or seemingly inconsequential, under the scrutiny of divine judgment. In this view, free will is not a natural ability to make independent choices, but rather a construct designed to ensure moral accountability in the eyes of God. The fear of divine punishment and the hope for divine reward create an internalized sense of guilt and sin, which Nietzsche believes shackles individuals to a moral system that represses their true desires and instincts. Consider, for example, a person raised in a deeply religious household, where every decision is weighed against the possibility of divine judgment. This person is taught to see their actions as a reflection of their moral standing before God, whether they are living according to His commandments or straying into sin. The individual may feel a constant inner battle, torn between their own desires and the moral code imposed by their faith. If they act in a way that is not in line with religious teachings, they may feel an overwhelming sense of guilt, believing that their free will has led them away from salvation. Nietzsche would argue that this internal conflict is not a genuine expression of free will but rather the result of societal and religious expectations. The person is not freely choosing their path, but is instead reacting to a moral framework that has been imposed upon them since childhood. Their ability to live authentically and make independent decisions is compromised by the weight of religious and societal expectations. This story illustrates Nietzsche's critique of Christian free will, where individuals are burdened by a moral system that demands constant self-surveillance and repentance. Rather than embracing a true sense of personal freedom, the individual is trapped in a cycle of guilt and shame, constantly assessing whether their actions align with divine will. Nietzsche sees this as a form of psychological imprisonment, where the individual's true desires and instincts are suppressed in favor of adherence to externally imposed moral codes. The idea of free will, in this context, becomes distorted, as it is entangled with the fear of divine retribution and the pressure to conform to religious expectations. A deeper examination of this dynamic reveals how religious doctrines of free will can be used as tools of control. Nietzsche believes that religion, especially Christianity, functions as a moral system that not only regulates behavior but also manipulates human emotions, particularly feelings of guilt and responsibility. The concept of sin and the idea of eternal punishment are central to this system. According to Nietzsche, by framing human choices in terms of divine judgment, Christianity creates a system in which individuals are constantly striving to align their actions with a set of rigid, externally imposed moral standards. The consequence of deviating from these standards is the threat of eternal damnation, which imposes an immense psychological burden on the individual. This framework not only suppresses true individuality but also promotes a morality of submission, where individuals are taught to relinquish their personal desires in favor of an external moral authority. Nietzsche's critique of religious free will is not merely theoretical, it is practical and deeply tied to his understanding of human psychology and development. He argues that individuals raised within a religious context are often taught to suppress their natural instincts and desires in favor of moral and spiritual ideals. This leads to the repression of the self, as individuals are conditioned to prioritize obedience and sacrifice over self-assertion and personal growth. Nietzsche's philosophy of self-overcoming stands in stark contrast to this religious framework. Rather than seeing moral responsibility as the fulfillment of divine commands, Nietzsche encourages individuals to embrace their natural instincts and desires, asserting their will to power and creating their own values. For Nietzsche, true freedom comes from rejecting the moral frameworks that are imposed by society and religion and instead embracing the process of self-creation and self-affirmation. To further illustrate this, imagine a person who has spent their life adhering to the moral teachings of their religious community. They have made choices based on the belief that they must follow divine commandments to achieve salvation, often at the expense of their own desires and dreams. This person may struggle to live authentically, feeling a disconnect between their true self and the identity they have cultivated according to religious ideals. Nietzsche would argue that this person's free will is compromised by the religious dogma they have internalized. Their decisions are not freely made but are instead shaped by a moral system that dictates how they should behave and what they should value. In contrast, Nietzsche advocates for a moral framework where individuals create their own values based on their own desires and instincts, free from the constraints of religious and societal judgment. The psychological toll of religious morality can also be seen in the way individuals experience guilt and self-recrimination. In many religious traditions, sin is a fundamental concept, and individuals are taught to view themselves as inherently flawed and in need of redemption. This constant sense of guilt and moral failure can be deeply damaging, as it fosters feelings of inadequacy and self-loathing. Nietzsche's critique of religious morality challenges this view, encouraging individuals to move beyond guilt and shame and to embrace a morality of strength, where self-overcoming and self-assertion are the primary virtues. By rejecting the traditional view of sin and guilt, Nietzsche advocates for a more authentic form of freedom, one that allows individuals to live in accordance with their own values and desires. In real-life applications, the pressure of moral and religious choices can severely limit personal freedom, especially when individuals feel they must conform to the dogmas of their upbringing. For many, the belief in a higher power and the fear of divine punishment can create a deep sense of responsibility that clouds their ability to make independent decisions. The internalization of religious teachings can lead to feelings of guilt, shame, and self-doubt, which inhibit the individual's ability to act freely and authentically. For instance, someone raised in a strict religious household may struggle to make life choices that align with their true desires, instead feeling compelled to follow the expectations set by their community or their faith. This external pressure can lead to a life that feels inauthentic and constrained, as the individual is not living in accordance with their own will but rather in response to the expectations of others. Nietzsche's critique of religious free will also has broader implications for our understanding of moral responsibility. If our choices are shaped by external moral frameworks and religious teachings, then the notion of personal responsibility becomes less about true autonomy and more about conforming to an imposed system of values. Nietzsche argues that true moral responsibility comes not from adhering to the rules of a higher authority but from creating our own values and living in accordance with our own desires. This shift in perspective allows for a more authentic form of self-expression and personal growth, free from the constraints of societal and religious expectations. In conclusion, Nietzsche's critique of religious free will reveals the profound ways in which religious morality imposes limitations on individual freedom. By framing free will within the context of sin, guilt, and divine judgment, religious doctrines create an environment in which individuals are burdened with the responsibility of aligning their actions with a higher moral authority. This framework stifles true autonomy and self-expression, leading individuals to internalize guilt and sacrifice their own desires in favor of an externally imposed moral code. Nietzsche's philosophy, in contrast, encourages individuals to embrace their natural instincts, reject the moral systems that restrict their freedom, and create their own values based on their own desires and experiences. This is the essence of Nietzsche's vision of human flourishing, one in which individuals assert their will to power and live authentically, free from the burden of divine judgment and societal expectations. Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy presents a radical reevaluation of the concept of free will, especially in relation to moral responsibility and human flourishing. Traditionally, the concept of free will has been closely tied to moral responsibility. This belief holds that if we are free to make choices, we are morally accountable for those choices. In this framework, human flourishing is often viewed as the product of making the right choices, choices that align with social or moral expectations. Nietzsche, however, challenges this connection, arguing that true human flourishing is not about adhering to a prescribed set of moral rules, but rather about embracing one's natural instincts, desires, and the inherent drive to overcome obstacles, the will to power. Nietzsche's view suggests that moral responsibility, as traditionally understood, may be an illusion, and that human flourishing lies not in conformity, but in the assertion of individual power and the rejection of societal constraints. At the heart of Nietzsche's critique is the concept that free will, as it is commonly understood, is an illusion. For Nietzsche, the traditional notion of free will, the idea that we consciously choose between good and evil, or that we can make moral decisions independent of external influences, fails to account for the deeper, more unconscious forces that drive human behavior. Our decisions, rather than being the product of rational deliberation and autonomy, are shaped by factors such as our instincts, desires, societal conditioning, and the influence of our environment. Nietzsche argues that the idea of free will, as it's traditionally conceived, is a byproduct of societal constructs designed to impose moral responsibility on individuals. These constructs create an illusion of moral agency, while actually serving to limit personal freedom by imposing rigid moral standards. Thus, Nietzsche suggests that the conventional understanding of moral responsibility may be fundamentally flawed, as it presupposes a level of autonomy that simply does not exist. This critique of free will leads Nietzsche to ask an important question: if free will is an illusion, can we still be morally responsible for our actions? Nietzsche rejects the idea that moral responsibility should be tied to an individual's capacity for free choice. Instead, he contends that true moral responsibility lies not in adhering to a fixed set of moral norms, but in embracing our natural instincts and desires, and in the act of creating ourselves through self-overcoming. Moral responsibility, from Nietzsche's perspective, is not about obeying external rules or conforming to social expectations, but about asserting one's own will and taking responsibility for one's actions as expressions of the will to power. Nietzsche's critique opens up the question of what it means for a human being to truly flourish. Human flourishing, in traditional moral systems, is often seen as the result of living a virtuous life, making good moral decisions, and adhering to a set of established values. These values, often derived from religious, cultural, or societal norms, serve as the foundation of what is considered a flourishing life. However, Nietzsche challenges this view, arguing that true flourishing cannot occur as long as individuals are confined by these external moral standards. According to Nietzsche, the path to flourishing is found in the rejection of societal norms and the embrace of one's inherent desires and instincts. True human flourishing, for Nietzsche, is not about conforming to the moral expectations of others, but about tapping into one's own power and striving to become the best version of oneself through self-assertion and self-overcoming. To better understand this concept, consider the example of a person who struggles to break free from societal expectations. Perhaps this individual is caught in a life defined by the need to please others, be it through career choices, relationships, or lifestyle decisions. They might pursue a career they don't care for, or enter a relationship that doesn't align with their true desires, simply because it's what society expects of them. This person's life is dictated by the pressure to conform to external norms. And as a result, they never tap into their fullest potential. They live a life of mediocrity, never truly expressing themselves or pursuing their authentic desires. Nietzsche would argue that this person is not flourishing. Instead of embracing their true instincts and desires, they are suppressing them in favor of societal approval. And in doing so, they deny themselves the opportunity to create a life of meaning and fulfillment. In contrast, Nietzsche envisions flourishing as a process of self-creation, where individuals transcend societal expectations and embrace their inherent will to power. True flourishing, in Nietzsche's view, occurs when individuals free themselves from the moral confines imposed by society, and instead take responsibility for shaping their own lives according to their own values. This involves embracing the natural instincts that are often suppressed by societal norms, instincts that drive human beings to assert themselves, to overcome obstacles, and to create new possibilities. Flourishing is not about following a prescribed set of moral rules, but about becoming the person one is truly capable of becoming through self-overcoming and self-assertion. A real-life example of this concept can be found in the story of someone who has always lived according to the expectations of others. Consider a person who grew up in a religious family, where moral decisions were always made for them, and the idea of right and wrong was dictated by religious doctrine. This individual may have spent their life making decisions based on what they were told was morally correct, without ever questioning whether these choices truly aligned with their personal desires. Perhaps they pursued a career in law or medicine because their parents expected them to do so. Or perhaps they stayed in a relationship out of a sense of obligation, rather than passion. Over time, this person may begin to feel a sense of dissatisfaction with their life, as they realize that they have never lived authentically. Nietzsche would suggest that this individual is not living in alignment with their true will to power, and that their path to flourishing comes from rejecting the external norms and forging their own way. In Nietzsche's view, the person who has always followed the path laid out by society, parents, or religion is trapped in a cycle of external validation. They are living in accordance with values that were imposed upon them, rather than creating their own values. True flourishing, for Nietzsche, comes from rejecting these imposed moral values and instead embracing the freedom to create one's own meaning in life. This is not a rejection of all morality, but rather a call to create a moral system that is authentic to the individual. Instead of living according to the moral expectations of others, individuals should embrace their natural instincts and desires, and strive to become the best version of themselves through self-assertion. This emphasis on self-creation and self-assertion also has profound implications for how we view success and achievement. In traditional moral systems, success is often defined by external measures: how well one adheres to moral rules, how much wealth one accumulates, or how much one conforms to social standards. Nietzsche challenges this view, arguing that true success is measured not by external standards, but by the ability to overcome one's limitations and become a fully realized individual. The will to power is not about controlling others or accumulating material wealth, but about the process of self-overcoming. of continually striving to transcend one's current state and achieve greater self-expression. Flourishing, then, is not about fitting into societal expectations, but about breaking free from them and creating a life that is true to oneself. To further illustrate Nietzsche's idea of flourishing, consider the life of a self-made entrepreneur. This individual may have faced significant challenges, societal pressures, familial expectations, financial limitations, but instead of allowing these external factors to dictate their life, they choose to forge their own path. Through determination, creativity, and the willingness to take risks, they build a successful business. This person's success is not merely the result of free will or independent decision-making, but rather the expression of their inherent drive to assert their own will to power. Nietzsche would argue that this person is flourishing, not because they conform to societal expectations, but because they have created a life that reflects their deepest desires and values. The entrepreneur has transcended external limitations and embraced their own instincts and desires, thereby achieving a form of success that is authentic and deeply meaningful. In contrast, a person who conforms to societal expectations, choosing a career or relationship based solely on external pressures, might experience a sense of dissatisfaction despite outward success. They may have achieved financial stability or social approval, but they have not created a life that is truly their own. Nietzsche would argue that this individual's life is marked by mediocrity, as they have failed to assert their own will to power and live authentically. True flourishing, for Nietzsche, occurs when we embrace our instincts, desires, and inner drive to create, rather than conforming to external standards. Nietzsche's critique of free will and his emphasis on self-creation challenges us to think about moral responsibility and human flourishing in new ways. Rather than focusing on external standards of morality or success, Nietzsche calls us to look inward, to embrace our natural instincts, and to create a life that is truly our own. Flourishing, in this sense, is not about achieving external validation or conforming to societal norms, but about living authentically and creating meaning through self-assertion. By rejecting the moral constraints imposed by society, we can unlock our full potential and become the individuals we are meant to be. This, according to Nietzsche, is the path to true human flourishing. Nietzsche's philosophy, with its radical rejection of traditional free will, forces us to confront the complexities of human agency, autonomy, and morality in ways that are both challenging and liberating. For centuries, Western philosophy has been dominated by the idea that free will is the cornerstone of human freedom. Our ability to make independent choices is what grants us autonomy and moral responsibility. However, Nietzsche challenges this long-held belief by asserting that free will, as it has traditionally been understood, is an illusion. In place of this conventional view, Nietzsche proposes a new way of thinking about freedom, one that is rooted not in the ability to make independent choices, but in the power to create and define ourselves through self-overcoming and self-assertion. At the heart of Nietzsche's critique is the notion that the concept of free will is often an external construct, something imposed by societal norms, religious doctrines, and moral systems rather than an inherent quality of human existence. Nietzsche argues that traditional free will is based on a misguided understanding of human behavior. Rather than being autonomous beings capable of independent, rational decision-making, human actions are deeply influenced by unconscious drives, social conditioning, and biological instincts. These forces shape our choices and actions in ways that we often do not fully recognize or control. The idea of free will, then, is nothing more than a comforting illusion, a myth perpetuated by cultural and religious institutions to maintain moral order and social control. However, Nietzsche's rejection of traditional free will does not leave us powerless. On the contrary, it opens the door to a new form of freedom, one that is not dependent on conforming to external moral or societal standards. Nietzsche's concept of freedom is closely tied to his idea of the will to power. This will to power is the fundamental drive that propels human beings to assert their strength, overcome challenges, and create new values. For Nietzsche, true freedom comes from overcoming the constraints imposed by society, religion, and biology, and embracing the power to define and shape one's own life. It is through this process of self-overcoming, transcending the limitations of the past and creating new possibilities, that individuals can assert their autonomy and live authentically. The rejection of traditional free will invites us to reconsider our moral responsibility. Nietzsche does not deny that we are responsible for our actions, but he suggests that moral responsibility should not be based on the concept of free will. Instead, he believes that moral responsibility is rooted in our ability to assert our will and create our own values. When we embrace the will to power, we take full responsibility for our lives, not because we have freely chosen to follow a set of moral rules, but because we have actively created a life that is authentic and true to our desires. Moral responsibility, in Nietzsche's view, is about living according to our own values, not conforming to the moral expectations imposed by society. This new conception of freedom opens up exciting possibilities for human flourishing. Nietzsche rejects the idea that flourishing can be measured by external standards of success or moral adherence. Instead, he argues that true flourishing comes from embracing our natural instincts, desires, and drives, those aspects of ourselves that society and religion often seek to suppress. Flourishing, according to Nietzsche, is about living authentically, rejecting societal constraints, and creating a life that is meaningful and fulfilling based on our own values. It is through self-creation and self-assertion that we achieve our highest potential and experience true freedom. Consider, for example, a person who has always followed societal expectations, making choices based on what is right or acceptable according to cultural or religious norms. This person may have lived a life of mediocrity, never tapping into their fullest potential because they have suppressed their natural desires and instincts in favor of external validation. Nietzsche would argue that this person has never truly flourished because they have not lived authentically, they have lived according to the dictates of society, not their own will. To flourish, according to Nietzsche, they must reject these external norms, embrace their inherent desires, and begin the process of self-creation. True flourishing comes when individuals live freely, not in the sense of making independent choices, but in the sense of actively creating themselves through self-overcoming. Real-life applications of Nietzsche's philosophy are vast and profound. Imagine someone who has always conformed to the expectations of their family, community, or religion. They have made decisions about their career, relationships, and lifestyle based on what others have told them is the right choice. But deep down, they feel unfulfilled, disconnected from their true desires, and unsure of who they really are. Nietzsche would encourage this person to break free from the constraints of societal and religious expectations and to embrace their own instincts and desires. This could mean leaving a career path that feels suffocating or pursuing a passion that was once considered impractical. Nietzsche would argue that true freedom lies not in simply following rules or seeking approval, but in creating a life that is authentic to oneself, driven by one's own desires, values, and will to power. To bring this philosophy into sharper focus, think about the stories of successful people who have forged their own paths, rejecting societal expectations in the process. Take, for example, entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, individuals who rejected traditional career paths and societal expectations in order to create something entirely new. These individuals may not have followed the conventional route to success, but by embracing their instincts, creativity, and drive, they were able to achieve remarkable success and, more importantly, live authentically. Nietzsche would argue that their success is not simply a result of rational decision-making, but the result of embracing the will to power, the drive to assert their strength, overcome obstacles, and create new possibilities. These individuals are examples of true flourishing, not because they fit into societal molds but because they transcended them and created something uniquely their own. Nietzsche's philosophy also challenges us to rethink our sense of moral responsibility. If free will is an illusion, as Nietzsche argues, then the moral judgments we make should not be based on the traditional idea of freely choosing between right and wrong. Instead, moral responsibility should be based on the way we live our lives and the values we create for ourselves. This shift in perspective frees us from the burden of guilt and shame associated with traditional moral systems, allowing us to live more authentically and with greater freedom. It also means that we must take responsibility for our lives not because we have freely chosen to follow moral rules, but because we have created our own path and embraced our own desires. This shift in moral thinking can have profound implications for how we relate to others and the world around us. If we embrace Nietzsche's philosophy of self-creation, we are free to engage with the world not from a place of obligation or duty, but from a place of authentic desire and strength. This shift allows us to live our lives more fully, with greater passion, purpose, and meaning. Instead of being burdened by societal norms, we can create a life that aligns with our own values, and in doing so, we can inspire others to do the same. One of the most powerful aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy is its emphasis on personal empowerment. By rejecting the illusion of free will and embracing the idea of self-creation, we take control of our own lives and take responsibility for shaping our future. This empowerment is not about controlling others or manipulating the world around us, but about asserting our own strength and creative potential. Nietzsche's vision of freedom is a freedom that comes from within, not from the absence of external constraints, but from the ability to shape our own destiny. As a call to action, we can ask ourselves, how can we apply Nietzsche's philosophy to our own lives? What societal norms, beliefs, or expectations are limiting our freedom and authenticity? What steps can we take to break free from these external constraints and begin living according to our own values and desires? Nietzsche's philosophy invites us to reflect on the choices we make, the life we create, and the person we are becoming. It challenges us to live authentically, driven by our own instincts, desires, and the will to power. Imagine waking up tomorrow with the freedom to create your life without the weight of traditional moral judgments and societal expectations. What would your life look like if you were truly free to live according to your own will? Free from the constraints imposed by others? Nietzsche's philosophy offers us a path to self-creation, where we can embrace our true desires, assert our strength, and live authentically, shaping a life that is uniquely our own. As we've seen, Nietzsche's rejection of free will is a radical but empowering idea. Instead of seeing ourselves as bound by a set of predetermined moral laws or societal expectations, Nietzsche challenges us to embrace the will to power, the drive to create ourselves, to transcend the limitations of the past, and to build our own path. It's a call to reject the illusion of free will and live authentically, fully engaged with the inherent power that lies within us. So, how can you apply Nietzsche's philosophy to your own life? What societal norms or beliefs limit your freedom? What steps can you take to start living according to your own desires and values? Nietzsche encourages us to confront these questions head-on and take full responsibility for the lives we choose to create. If you're ready to break free from the constraints of traditional moral judgment and societal norms, it's time to begin your own journey of self-creation. Embrace the process of becoming who you truly are. Don't let external forces dictate your life path. Take charge and create a life that reflects your deepest instincts and desires. If this video has sparked new ideas for you, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with others who might benefit from these ideas, and subscribe to the channel for more insights into Nietzsche's philosophy and beyond. Your support means everything to me, and if you've enjoyed the video, a super thanks would be an incredible way to show your appreciation and help the channel grow. Remember, Nietzsche's philosophy isn't just a theory, it's a call to action. It's a challenge to live fully, live authentically, and create your own path to greatness. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.